Genevieve is a 30-year-old mother to her 9-year-old daughter and a dermal clinician whose life has been profoundly shaped by living with lipedema. Although she first encountered the condition while studying dermal science at university, her understanding of lipedema became deeply personal when she recognized many of its signs and symptoms in herself.
After initially being told that she did not have lipedema, Genevieve was formally diagnosed with lipedema types 3 and 4 several years later whilst working as a lymphedema practitioner. Her journey with the condition has significantly influenced not only her health, but also her relationships, sense of self, and the direction of her career.
Through sharing her personal experience, Genevieve hopes to bring greater awareness to the realities of living with lipedema, the challenges many women face, but also hope for women who feel as though lipedema has taken over their lives.
Welcome back to the Lipoedema podcast. We are your hosts, Shell
and Tiana. Today we have a lipedema warrior. It is Genevieve Topalov. Hello, Genevieve. How are you?
Hi, I'm really well, thanks, ladies. How are you?
Yeah, good, thank you.
Always good and always excited to talk to our warriors. We're going to get straight into the questions so that we have enough time to hear all about you. What first made you realize something wasn't right in your body?
So it probably wasn't until my mid-20s. So I was studying at university and we learned about these conditions in our university degree called lipedema and lymphedema. And you kind of look at some of these images and go, oh, gee, that's really interesting. And the symptoms that go along with that and the pain and those sorts of things. But we saw it was still the early days of talking about lipedema. So we really only saw images of the extreme cases, the really severe, stage 3, 4 type lipodemas. And we had case studies around those women. But during that time, I was also, post-COVID, trying to get back into a lot of exercise and things. And I was exercising a lot with CrossFit and doing a nutrition program. And I really struggled to lose weight or see any changes. But I was so sore in my legs. I would wake up every day and they would just be burning. My back was always sore. My arms were always sore. And I thought, gee, this really can't be right. And I was talking to one of my lecturers. I was so frustrated and I was saying, look, I've done this program and I just don't get what's going on. Like they're saying to me, well, you must have cheated or maybe the calorie settings weren't quite right or something like that. But at the same time, I was so sore and I thought, look, I'd just love to reshape my legs a bit. And I'm like, can I do body contouring? What can I do? And she said, look, I think you need to look into whether there's something wrong like lipedema. And I kind of thought, oh, yeah, maybe. Like that's, an area I'm interested in and that sort of thing. But again, what we were looking at was the later stages of lipedema. The earlier stages weren't really being discussed. So I went to someone who's quite well known and trusted in the industry. And again, at that time, we were all talking about later stages, not earlier stages. And I just casually said to her, can you look at my legs? What do you think? And she goes, no, you're just overweight. Don't stress about it. The lipodemas are the big, big legs. Like, don't even worry. So I'd gone to my GP and he's like, yep, look, don't worry about your weight. You're so beautiful, all this kind of stuff. And I was going, well, I'm not here because I think I'm ugly. I'm here because I need to lose weight. Struggling, as you do. Like, he just goes, you're so beautiful. And that wasn't what, I didn't think.
I didn't say I wasn't beautiful.
Yeah. Like, no, I know. I'm talking about my weight.
How frustrating. So anyway, so I've Duramine for probably the third time in my life from him and gone absolutely off my rockers and thought, that's not it. But then I'd moved back to Queensland after all of that and was working as a lymphedema practitioner. So I'd finished my accreditation and I was seeing more and more women with lipedema. And they were still mostly clients in those later stages. And at that time, I didn't even have a full-length mirror at home. So I wasn't looking at my body. I just went, look, Jen, your body is what it is. Just put it on the back burner. You're a busy working mum. Try and do what you can, but it's just all in your head kind of thing. And I'd convinced myself it was all in my head. So then one day I thought, look, I've got to get a bit of clarity and I just need someone to tell me it's all in my head so that I can move on. So I've had the telehealth appointment with beautiful Sally Baker. And as soon as I'd taken the images that morning at my clinic and put them up in my screen, my brain went, that woman has lipedema. She has the lipedema leg shape.
Wow.
She's going to be a lipedema lady. And then my images. And then the first thing that Sally Baker said to me was, oh, Genevieve, how could you think you didn't have lipedema? So it was a big process.
Yeah, that's a huge realization. Isn't it funny how photos are so different to what we perceive in the mirror?
Yeah.
Yes. Absolutely. And to this day, there's times where I see a photograph of myself and probably not so much the last year or so, but a few years before that. And I would just have a whopping arm. There's this gorgeous photo of me holding my nephew. And, there's my nephew, who's a big boy. And then there's my massive arm beside him. And in my head, I've just gone, I don't see my arms as that big. Like, I look in the mirror and I see my face and my body, I just don't associate my body as having lipedema. And I don't see myself that way. So it's probably the reverse, where some people would go, I think I'm much bigger or this or that than what I am. But in my mind, I didn't eat enough to be that big. I didn't, I was too active to be that big. So I feel like I had some kind of reverse body dysmorphia or something happening, where I've gone, in my head, I just can't accept that I'm this big girl with these big arms and these massive legs and a bottom that doesn't fit into any jeans or fit into anything. So that's been a big, a little area that I don't talk about often, but it's really quite confronting.
Yeah, I think other people could relate to that as well. Like, I certainly do relate to that feeling of having the body dysmorphia, but in reverse.
Yeah.
And then I see photos of myself and go, okay, I didn't realize I looked like that. And it's so bizarre.
But I also find, I think I said it to you one day, if you see me in a photo by myself, you have no idea of my size.
Totally. Because your proportions
Because I'm
are
proportioned.
excellent.
Yeah, I've got great proportions. I've got great muscle tone. I've got great everything. I'm just in a big package. So it's only when there's other people in a photo with me that you can sort of get the idea of how big I really am. It's wild.
It is
I
wild.
think when we're taking photos of ourselves, like I pose in a certain way, so you don't see my big arms, you don't see my big legs, I've kind of learned to kind of pose to hide all those things. But then when someone gets a photo of you from a certain angle and you go, oh my gosh, that's me, and I'm sure every woman on the face of the planet, I don't know that we're all, perfectly photogenic from all angles, but it's really, I think we learn to kind of hide the parts about ourselves that we don't like, or that we go, oh gee, that's not quite a good look, so I'll hide that away. But then when you see it from someone else's perspective or a different perspective where there's no hiding, it is a little bit confronting sometimes.
100%. So when you got your lipedema diagnosis, how did it change how you saw your body? We were talking about that reverse body dysmorphia. Did any of that shift?
So look, in the long term, it's obviously been really, really helpful and great. I was kind of the opposite. So of people who go, oh, it was so liberating and it was so amazing to realize, all of this. I really just wanted to be told that it's all in your head. So I was in the reverse situation where I knew what lipedema was. I knew what the long-term outcome was. I knew how expensive therapies and surgeries and all these sorts of things were. And I wanted someone just to tell me it's all in your head. It's all your fault. It's something that you've done, because then at least if it's just something that's happened because I haven't eaten well enough or I haven't exercised enough, or it's my fault, then it's something that I can change about myself and I'll get skinnier and I'll get prettier and my lumpy legs will go away. And if I, but having this thing where they say, well, here's something that you've got and it's really hard to live with and it's going to be really expensive and you're going to be in a lot of pain and lifelong, you can't just lose the weight and be this happy, amazing version of yourself. That's much, much scarier than just saying it's on you. There's something just wrong with you, your mindset, your level of activity, go away and change. So whilst, certainly overall having that confirmation that yes, it is lipedema, initially it was really terrifying and really scary. And I thought, my gosh, how am I going to end up? Obviously that means, am I going to end up like my nana who struggled with her legs? What's going to happen in my life? And so, I really, really struggled after hearing that. Initially it was like, oh, well, that's a relief knowing and getting the clarity. But then it's like this deep realization sinks in and it's kind of like almost a dread of going, oh no, it's like, if someone told you had, and I don't want to compare to cancer survivors, it's a very different thing, but if someone told you had cancer or some other condition that you've got no other control of, so no ability to control, it's very difficult to accept that. So I think that's where a lot of my kind of journey has come from, is gone, I know that there's a really big need for women who have lipedema to get better therapies and better access to services and all these sorts of things. But I know that the help isn't there. I know that the support's not there. And that's slowly changing over the years. But I know it's going to be a really long fight. So definitely not what I wanted at that stage in my life.
Yeah, that's totally fair. And I guess what's similar to other people, even though you mentioned that it was sort of a little bit backwards, but that emotional roller coaster that comes with having a diagnosis was still there for you, it felt like in a bit of a different way.
Absolutely. Look, and there's, I'm not going to put a pessimistic spin on it, you know. It's certainly overall been really helpful to get clarity and understanding on what's going on. And certainly if I was still wandering around and not having that clarity, it would be very, very hard. Much, much, much harder than now. It's just that initial shock and kind of dread and having to come to terms with that. And sometimes even, you know, like even just 2 weeks ago, I was having a really rough time. I put on a little bit of weight and I was looking at my lumpy legs in the mirror after I'd been for a lovely infrared sauna. And I just thought, doesn't matter how many saunas I do or whatever I do, I'm always going to have lipedema, even if I have surgery, even no matter what it is. And so it's having to remind myself to accept that I have lipedema so that then I can live a beautiful, happy, healthy, full life and not get in the trap or the mindset of thinking, maybe if I just do a little bit more, it will all go away. Maybe if I just massage more, all the lumpiness will go away. Because it's having that realistic expectation around it as well.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And so what in your stages of life now, so looking back after you got diagnosed and knowing what lipedema was even before you got diagnosed with it, were there any stages of your life where you saw symptoms noticeably shift in any way?
Absolutely. So I'd say a really big one was definitely pregnancy. So we all get swollen and all those sorts of things. And it often, you know, they say, oh, my legs are really swollen. They go, oh, that's just from pregnancy. So pregnancy normalizes everything, which was interesting. But even before pregnancy, I had a really stressful period in my life. My daughter's father was really unwell and there were lots of things going on. And I noticed, you know, my arms were getting really sore, my legs were getting really sore and big. And I thought, oh, it's just weight gain and I need to lose weight and I'll feel better. So even before then, I'd seen a GP, you know, saying I'm struggling with weight gain, that, you know, I'm stressed, I'm eating less, I'm moving more, you know, I don't understand why I'm gaining weight. I thought if I'm stressed, I should be losing weight. So fairly consistently, I can see over my life, whenever there's been big periods of stress, lipedema symptoms have absolutely gotten worse. And even to the point just before I opened my clinic in Toowoomba, you know, I had really big swollen arms. I was so stressed and obviously wasn't doing anything to help, you know, in terms of what would help lipedema. And they were so big and sore, you could touch them, you know, and they would just be so incredibly sore. And a lot of that I felt was really spurred on by stress. If I was stressed or even just, you know, coming into, you know, the time of the month and those sorts of things, all the symptoms would be worse. So I definitely see that pattern. But in terms of those really early signs, definitely during puberty, now that I'm looking back on photos, you know, and I was so proud of my, you know, my big bum, my thick thighs and my, you know, strong arms. You know, I was like, look, I've got the CrossFit body without even having to go to CrossFit that often. You know, it's a phase where big bums were in and the thick thighs. So I was like, yeah, I'm rocking this. I'm so gorgeous. And you know, I was gorgeous. But for me then, like I said, now I look back and I go, oh yeah, Jen, those big arms and, you know, that big bum and everything. But back then I loved it. Like if you told me there was something wrong with me, I would have been like, you're dreaming.
That's so good.
There's nothing wrong with you, Jen.
Nothing at all.
You're gorgeous.
And I've never looked, like, for the hundreds of women with lipedema that I've seen, I've never looked at a woman with lipedema and thought, you're not beautiful or you're not gorgeous or anything like that. Like when a woman's walked into my room, I love each and every one of the women that I see with lipedema. And I just think they're the most beautiful, amazing people on the face of the planet. But when we look at ourselves, I think we treat ourselves a little bit differently too. So yeah, definitely. Yeah, I never want any of my clients to think, oh gosh, if I've ever seen her and she thought I was hideous or something. That's never, ever, ever happened. So
No. Love that compassionate care that you give.
absolutely.
So when you're like now, you're saying that you're on a bit of a sabbatical. What are you doing to care for your lipedema?
Absolutely. Well, I think like the early few years was definitely about lipedema focused therapies, treating the lipedema, trying to help the lipedema. Now I've had to really take a big step back and just be like, you know what? I don't experience just lipedema. There's, you know, and everyone that I say, you know, in every way, it's the stress, it's the mental health, it's like, yes, nutrition and all those sorts of things that we know about as well. But it's even things like gut health. So coming off the GLP-1s, I had a really difficult time with the, you know, gut health in particular. So really having to address that, and something that I thought I would never, ever, ever in my life ever look at, colon hydrotherapy, which ended up being my saving grace. My abdomen was so swollen all the time. There's no amount of massage I could do. And one of my clients mentioned it. I thought, I'd never, ever do that. That's just like off this planet weird. But I went and saw the beautiful Chloe up in Toowoomba from Thriver Wellness, and she has been amazing. So actually getting my gut health under control, and then really focusing on proper supplementation, nutrition, and mental health, managing stress load as well. We had a quick discussion beforehand that my doctor thinks I might have ADHD, and we're very unsure about that or whether it's just lifestyle stress, but definitely looking bigger. So doing all of the conservative things, so keeping up with the compression, the beautiful movement, walking, swimming, whatever we can do, and nutrition, that's been really, really fundamental, as well as self massage. So thankfully I'm good at that. But then looking a little bit bigger has been so important. So looking at that gut health, really working on metabolic health and getting the right types of supplements and those sorts of things, and then mental health too.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the things is that when we're told we have lipedema and we've told this conservative management that we've got to do, like compression and massage and all of those things, it's almost as well as looking after yourself holistically. So we've still got to look after our diet, our sleep, our exercise, our mental health, and making sure that, all that stress isn't getting in the way. And I think that sometimes it adds stress, thinking that you have to tick all of these conservative management things, or the stress of saving money for surgeries, or, there's so much involved that I actually think mental health should be right after your diagnosis. But I think someone the sort of thing I do is I sit with people and solutions focus. Okay, so what do we look at first? And I think everyone needs someone to do that with.
Absolutely. And look, even though I'm a
To
therapist,
guide their thoughts.
it's having someone to sit down and go, okay, well, let's break this down. What's really practical for you? Because we've all read those booklets that it does. Okay, now you eat well. Now you wear a compression garment. Well, how do you even find the right compression garment? How do you do all this stuff? How do you know what you should be eating? So having those support networks is so important. So having an amazing dietitian who can just sometimes give clarity, but even just in the most simple terms of having someone sit opposite you while you talk about it and say, this is what I'm struggling with. As a therapist, I do that for my clients all the time, but I don't really have anyone to do that with. So, it's kind of it's all in my head, and I've got to get it out of my head and hear someone give me back some clarity. That's such a natural process to go through with counseling and things like that. But I think, my personal perspective, I wish myself that I had a counselor and I had someone to talk about it with, but that I wish everyone with lipedema, there was so much more awareness about it, about, talking through things through, but then not just telling people they need to talk about it, actually having safe places where women can gather. So, out in Warwick in regional Queensland, there is an amazing, amazing support group out there. The women who are in that support group are phenomenal. And they, they thank me for going out there. And I think, oh my goodness, no, thank you, because you are my lifeline of having a space where we can just talk about having lipedema and joke about things and compare notes and all that sort of thing. And just being really good company of other people who know what you're talking about, not feeling like you're always having to explain something for the first time to everyone, or justify why you have lipedema, it's not something I gave myself, I didn't go and go, oh, yeah, I think today I'll go get some lipedema and I'll just have the lipedema label. It's not a label. It's not fun to live with. So, yeah, and those women out there in Warwick, if they are listening, they are just the most beautiful, amazing women. So
I love that, remote communities are coming together. That
Totally.
is so good, because it can be hard to find specialists in remote communities. So if you can find your people, that's even better.
100%.
Yeah.
They are amazing.
Yeah. So you have spoken about, community, how important that is. What has been the biggest tool or support system that's made a difference for you?
I think professionally, having other professionals to reach out to has been important. And then being in a really, really privileged position where I've been in a position where I've had access to some really advanced therapies that otherwise aren't so available in Australia, and people from Europe and different areas, the way that they're treating. And so even as a dermal clinician, in the Netherlands, there's another, profession of dermal clinicians. So we're very new. We're new profession. And very niche, but they deal a lot more with lymphedema and lipedema as well. So just having the professional privilege of being able to talk to those people when they come over for conferences and those sorts of things, and just being able to reach out on a personal level has given me a very different perspective on lipedema, I think. So I probably do things in a way that's very different to the norm. So I'm incredibly privileged, to have had access to things like medical endomology, which is different to the cosmetic endomology. Having, obviously a skin-based clinic where I've had access to a professional red light laser therapy, that's been amazing. And so being able in the early days to stabilize my own condition, treating myself, that's been amazing. But definitely I'd say that the things that definitely made the biggest difference, so having the right compression garments. And I often talk about having like a compression wardrobe. So having your exercise compressions, your tighter compressions for, when you have your menstruation and those sorts of things, and or you're just stressed and everything's inflamed. And, your comfy lymphatic support garments like your Bioflex, all those sorts of things. So having that compression wardrobe to fall back on. And then I'd say really probably the thing that for me that did make that biggest difference was looking after gut health and stress. And so for me personally, those were my two biggest barriers to what I felt like was stabilizing my lipedema, or the flip side to think about it would be like they were my biggest triggers. So stress and when I was really inflamed with my gut health, that would then, my legs would then, be so swollen. My abdomen would be swollen, my legs would be swollen. And of course, a third of our lymphatic system actually sits around our gut in a specialized part of our lymphatic system. So when that's congested and blocked and, your tummy's swollen, nothing else really seems to flow that well. But so I'd say definitely, all the gut health therapies, and then just being able to cope with stress, which is a lot easier said than done there. So in terms of specific tools, I'd say the compression garments, and then having some bowel therapies and things like that as well.
So we haven't had very many people talk about like gut health and intestinal health and stuff like that. So, but I think it obviously, like the gut's the second brain. It contributes to stress. It contributes to our sympathetic nervous system. Like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
And also because like lipedema is a connective tissue disorder, and that affects your gut too, because connective tissue makes up everything. So it's going to make your gut do some weird and wonderful things too.
And I think we need to and I think this is like probably getting a bit ahead of myself. I can talk about it again in the future, but gut health, I think, is going to be a really big emerging area of understanding lipedema and the impacts of lipedema. And certainly I've seen, from a clinical perspective, the impacts of women when they're improving their gut health. And I see that on the table when we're doing therapy on them, and they're improving their quality of life and stabilizing their symptoms. But I do really think that when women are told, focus on doing specific diets and things like that, and medications, we do also need to have more of a conversation around how that impacts gut health. It's not just about, do you feel sluggish? Are you constipated? Are you sore? Is it creating some inflammation? Inflammation is a big part of the story, but it's also, how are you absorbing nutrients? If you're in constant pain in your abdomen, how is that affecting your nervous system? If you have chronic inflammation in your gut, that's huge. Like, your bowel is huge. How is that then? How can you reduce inflammation and lipedema if you have another major source of inflammation sitting, right under the lipedema tissue of the abdomen, of course, but then sitting right there close to everything else? So I think that's going to start emerging as a big area, but certainly I'd say that's probably been my biggest weapon, has been looking at, well, if you are, chronically constipated or have IBS or all those sorts of things, or just have really sluggish gut health and you're not absorbing nutrients, you're constantly nutrient deficient despite taking supplements and those sorts of things, is working with, a bowel therapy clinic, or if you want to go a little bit, a little bit off the beaten path, hydrotherapy, those sorts of things are a small part of that. But I really do think it's probably one of the biggest understated areas of managing lipedema holistically, is looking at gut health, nutrient absorption, and all those sorts of things. And part of nutrition is then stabilizing hormones. So if we're chronically inflamed in the gut and we're not absorbing essential nutrients that are really important for regulating hormonal health, like, your B12, zinc, iron, copper, all these things, how does that then play into the grand scheme of things? So some women might go, look, it's all too much and it's all too hard, and there is a lot that we need to understand with lipedema, so it does get a bit too much at times. But for me personally, I think, understanding the gut health connection and including even just, particular supplements and things like that into there has been an absolute game changer in terms of managing and stabilizing the lipedema.
Yeah, it definitely is a really important part of everyone's lives. Like, it's just, that, like you said, the second break. Yeah, all that foundational stuff. And that segues beautifully into, you just mentioned like it can overwhelming, everything else. How do you live a full life with lipedema without having to put things on hold or miss out on things? What do you do?
I do a lot. If you know me in my personal life, we've had a very big last few years. Certainly, I'd say having a little bit more confidence in terms of knowing that the lipedema is manageable. It's not going to prevent me from having more children, even if they might have it, knowing that there's hope, knowing there's things I can do. For me, kind of the biggest part of my life where I felt like it was really impacting was my self-confidence. So I wouldn't wear swimmers to the beach. I wouldn't do all those basic things. And I never really felt pretty per se. But then I also felt like it was a big barrier in terms of relationships. So, just feeling not pretty enough or having this big, scary, ugly thing that like no one could ever love me because of these big legs and these, thick arms and that sort of thing. But actually last year in August at the Lipoedema conference, I went on a beautiful date and had met the most amazing man. So he has really shown me that, there's so much more to life than the shape of your thighs and your chunky arms and all that kind of thing. So I think definitely having that different perspective of my lipedema has let me just go, you know what, it's something that I've got. It's something that's not so disgusting that no man would ever look at me or anything like that. And really just trying to go, what are the things that I can do? So, I love bike riding. Could I ride a normal bike, without, just could I do a big Gold Coast ride? Absolutely not. But I can get an e-bike, and that takes the pressure off my knees so that I can ride that bike again. Am I confident wearing swimmers at the beach? No. Do I still do it now? Yes. And it's, you just have to start sometimes doing those things that you're uncomfortable doing and just being like, you know what? Everyone's going to see my chunky thighs. My neighbors are going to see my thick knees or whatever, and just being like, it's not the end of the world. Like, no one's going to fall off their balconies because they saw me walking down to the pool with some cellulite. Like, it's just not a thing. So I think psychologically getting over that barrier has been the biggest thing. And then just finding ways to be able to do what you love doing. If you love walking, but it's, your knees hurt too much, you try and take something along with you to help you walk along the way. I'd say definitely, though, it's only been able to kind of know that I can control the lipedema, that's then kind of given me room to be able to go and do all these things that I love doing. So before that, when I felt like it was just all out of control, there was no hope, my legs and my arms were so sore constantly that I couldn't have ridden a bike while I was so inflamed and so easily bruising. I would come home with bruises all over my legs and my arms would just kill me, and my back and shoulders, everything was sore. So definitely having the right support and stabilizing the condition has then meant I can return to doing a lot of those things. So yeah, I think I'm getting a bit off track here, but I think just those two things. One, the psychological aspect, and then two, the physical aspect of actually having the right medications, having the right support and therapies in place is then what lets me kind of go, okay, now I can focus on everything I love doing.
Yeah, it makes so much sense. You get those foundational things in place, and you do things with courage despite how you feel inside, like not being super comfortable with wearing swimwear, but doing it anyway. That shows a lot of courage and determination, and nobody's looking at you anyway, and nobody cares.
And
so I
because,
think
we're in
it's
a
really
gated
important.
communities, pool, everything. There's people looking at you. You can't not look at people. But what does it matter? Like, what? Even if they did think, what, that woman's legs are really, really ugly and gross and ill, cellulite or whatever. Like, I've had stories where women were like, this guy said, oh, you were so pretty until you stood up and I saw your legs. And I go, that's horrible. And then I think, you know what? Not everybody's going to think lipedema is beautiful. That's a them problem. That's not a me problem. I don't hear.
Yeah, that's a them problem. They're just projecting their shit. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a them problem. It's like when everybody in the street has a beautiful house and you live in the unrenovated older house. You don't have to look at your own house. You have a beautiful outlook at everybody else's houses. What does it matter?
I love
Once
that.
you have a house, who cares? So
that's right. That's right. Oh, that's a good analogy. I like that. So we've come to our last question, Genevieve. What do you wish someone had have told you before you were diagnosed?
Well, this is a question that I think I struggled with the most when you guys sent me through. And I probably brainstormed for about half an hour and I go, what am I going to say? And in all honesty, I don't know that there is something that anyone could have told me beforehand that would have really changed my outlook. And again, coming from a perspective where I knew what lipedema was and all those sorts of things. But if I had to give myself some advice that I'd actually listen to and say, I'm not very good at taking advice, or, that sort of thing, is if I had a little crystal ball, I just wish someone could have given me a crystal ball that said, look, in 2 years from now, here's where you're going to be. There is someone who loves you unconditionally and honest to God deserves the, what is it, canonization as a saint, for patients. Like, he is amazing. Your child's going to be happy and healthy, all these sorts of things. If someone could just give me a little ball and be like, you know what, you're going to be okay. Your life's not over. You're gorgeous, all those sorts of things. I think that would have made the biggest difference. And I think for other women, if no matter what stage you are at in the journey, nothing with lipedema changes quickly. So it's a really slow condition to change. There's a lot of aspects of ourselves that we need to work on when we have a chronic condition like this. But if just you can think about, where's my little crystal ball going to be in 2 years or 3 years or 5 years? And if there's anything that's scary in that crystal ball, really work on that. But just know that crystal ball can be in a really, really good place. Yeah, and I think just if I had been able to see 2 years ahead, I would have stressed half as much. But
Totally.
just that you're going to be okay is probably the biggest thing.
Yeah, I love that. And nothing's permanent. Like,
Yeah.
the state you're in now, whether it be negative or positive, there will be another state and in another place, and like everything is so transient. So if you are struggling, like, there is an end to that.
And we all struggle with it. Like, people look at me and be like, oh my gosh, you're so lucky. And I think, well, I still struggle with it. It's not that anybody doesn't struggle. And I'm very mindful that there are people who are in a really, really bad place with the lipedema. So all our women who are kind of this severe end of the spectrum or experiencing really severe symptoms, they've been hospitalized with cellulitis and they're being immobilized and all those sorts of things, and they don't have access to support and services. I think that, I would have loved the crystal ball, but some women are going to be in situations where they're in a really, really tough situation medically and they can't get the support. They are in hospital dealing with cellulitis. They're in really, really difficult places. And I think as a community, we kind of need to stand up and really advocate for people or women who are in the real thick of it, and just saying, these are women who are in such bad pain. Some women can't walk because of lipedema. They feel like their life has been devalued so much. So I think there's such a long way to go in terms of advocating for those women. And sometimes the little crystal ball for those women, if they don't get help, it's not going to look much better. But so I think it's really important to have hope, but then also to try and make sure that we as a community gather around the few of us who aren't able to get, the right compressions, the really advanced care that they need as well. I think that's important to keep in mind. So I've rambled on a little bit there.
Yeah, it's so true. No, I love that. And that's, why the Lipoedema podcast exists, is to do our bit at trying to advocate. And I know that there are other people with other mechanisms and they do their thing. And the word is getting out there about lipedema, which is a good thing. And then the care hopefully will follow. It's a slow process, but it's a process nonetheless. So, yeah. We're fighting. Exactly. Well, Genevieve, it's been a pleasure talking to you today. Thank you so much for your time. And we look forward to chatting to you later on in the year.
Amazing. Thank you so much, ladies.
Thank you. Bye.
Lipedema and its symptoms vary from individual to individual. The opinions and advice voiced in this podcast are of a personal nature and used for educational purposes.
Please take away from this podcast what resonates with you, and please see your GP or preferred specialist for diagnosis and healthcare. We are Shelley and Tiana from the Lipoedema podcast. Until our next episode, bye for now.